interviews with indie developers, and this time I'm going to interview Andrew Shouldice from Tunic, which is a very interesting, amazing exploration game, and it also brings us back to the old times. So without further ado, let's tune in. There are a lot of different explanations what the game is. Well, what would you say the game is?
The elevator pitch for Tunic is that it is an isometric action adventure about a tiny fox in a big world where you explore the wilderness, fight monsters, and find secrets.
Okay, and because like a lot of people, they compare it, well, mostly with Zelda, with the old Zelda. Was that like the inspiration for the game?
Tunic came from a place of wanting to make a game that made me feel the way I felt when I was a little kid playing NES games. And I feel like that is not uncommon, like a lot of people want and have done that. It was this really particular feeling that I had playing those games that I wanted to sort of evoke. And that was the feeling of not understanding what's going on, of being in a place that feels too big and too intricate to fully comprehend, but knowing that there's stuff hidden around the corners. So, you know, the feeling of reading instruction manuals while someone else is playing the game, trying to piece together the meaning in a world like that, that really particular feeling was what I wanted to accomplish there.
Yeah, I need to admit I made a little mistake when I was very fast tuning in, and then I said like, oh, new game, and then suddenly it all it all restarted. But then indeed I was excited because I knew kind of a lot more, like all those hidden secrets you already kind of knew, so you can kind of rush around it. Was that your goal, like that your game would be like replayable a lot, or was that just like something that came along?
Replayability sort of came along for the ride, I guess. That's a good way to put it. The core idea was realizing you could do things the whole time. And that is, I think, a design tactic where information is withheld from the player so that when they do discover that something is possible, they start to ask, what else can I do right now that they're not telling me? What other secrets exist in this world that are sort of hidden in plain sight?
Yeah, because when I was replaying it apart, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of foreshadowing. Did you have that in mind? Like, okay, so because, for example, before you get a magic orb, you see the enemies also like doing kind of magic orb things. Like, was that like the build-up of all the mechanics that you were like, okay, I'm going to have this element, and before that, all the enemies will do this thing?
Yeah, and I think that that's another design tactic that's used quite often, is sort of tease things before they show up and give players sort of anticipation of what's to come. And sometimes that's, you know, you can see a treasure chest off in the distance, or a game might explicitly tell you what the reward for a challenge is. And that happens in Tunic, and I think the thing that I treasure most and I hope happens in Tunic is not just letting people know about a benefit they might receive or a treasure they might get, but introducing concepts just so they can be mysteries, introducing something that isn't necessarily, oh boy, I can't wait to get that prize, but I have no idea what this thing is. One of the things that characterized development of Tunic was a lot of iteration and like rearranging the world, and a lot of that was overlapping things so that certain elements were visible early on, especially if you just walked off the beaten path slightly. You know, you might see a strange obsidian monolith or a giant gold plaque or a strange device on the ground, and the critical path, or, you know, insofar as Tunic has a critical path, is dotted with these sort of, I guess, treats. You know, they're not prizes that you're going to get later, but they're tantalizing mysteries that the hope is that people will start to develop this, like, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on here that I don't understand.
Yeah, I felt it, so I guess that's I mean, I hear the Tunic, when I said like, oh, I'm going to interview Tunic, people were like, Tunic, I know Tunic, right? So there is a player base. And also, I just think it's nice to say, like, in 2018, I saw it for the first time at Gamescom. So nice. I just saw it, like, developing over time. Have you worked on the game, like, solo for all the time?
So the game started as a solo project. I worked on it total for 7 years before it was released, and now, I mean, now it's been more than that now. It started out as solo But very quickly, I realized, well, I don't know how to do music and I don't know how to do sound effects well. And so I got help with that. Terrence Lee and later Janice Kwan composed the soundtrack, which is a spectacular, like 3 or 4 hour thing that you should check out if you haven't. And Kevin Regamy and the rest of the folks at Power Up Audio came on early to do audio design. Just about everything else was just me for a long time, aside from business development, which is something that I don't really have a whole lot of acumen with. So Felix Kramer and later my publisher Finji helped a great deal on that front in innumerable ways. A couple of years before release, Eric Billingsley came on to help do another different assortment of things, like doing level decoration and writing some shader effects and a bunch of other stuff. So it started out as a solo project, but quickly accrued sort of a small team of people. And then there are others like contractors doing illustrations and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, and so you started on your own. So was it like a side hustle, or was it like, I have this as a side project and I'm just going full time, or was it like a side hustle? What I hear quite a lot.
It was a very explicit, I'm starting this full time. I had worked at a casual game studio for a while, making a bunch of different types of projects, none of which really fired my imagination in the way I, wanted games to, in sort of games that I wanted to make. So I saved up money and said, okay, I'm going to do it. At that point in my life, the thing that pushed me over the edge and made me say, like, okay, you can do this thing, because I'm not very good at taking risks. The thing that pushed me over the edge was thinking to myself, if I don't do this, I will always wonder what would have happened if I did. Right? I'm not saying that's good advice, right? I'm not telling people out there to go quit their day jobs and make an indie game, but it was a very explicit, like, okay, I am, February 1st, 2015, I am starting full-time work on this.
Okay, and so if I hear it, like, you were working full-time, and did you at that moment already were like, oh, I'm going to work 6 hours a day, or was it immediately, I want to work 10 hours a day and already like into the crunch?
Early on, I remember being like, it felt like my brain was on fire. Like I was so excited about doing everything. Anytime you start a project, if you are really passionate about it, there's this point where there's an infinite list of things to do. And all of them are exciting because it's making something fresh. And that's, for me, like thrilling. That's the allure of like starting a new project. And it was super exciting. I don't want to say I burnt out in that mode, but I did realize, I'm going to have to pace myself to a certain degree. Then over the course of the first, year or two, got into a pretty good groove of not overworking myself. It was, work every day that you can. And if you aren't able to do it, then, take a break, take a nap, go for a walk. Don't kill yourself doing this thing. Before launch, when the list of things becomes more pressing and more real, the hours per day count goes up, and it fluctuates over the years. I also don't have an especially good memory. Two facts about me: I have trouble committing to risky things, and I have a terrible memory. So I started logging all my time, starting in I think about 2017. So minute by minute, I would log what I was working on. I mean, not minute by minute, but at the end of a chunk of work, I would say I spent 71 minutes doing this. And that was really useful just to, I guess, look back and see where I spent time and that sort of thing. But also to realize, what? Even though it feels like I haven't accomplished much today, I have been sitting in front of my computer doing actual work for, 6, 7, 8 hours today. It's okay if I take a break. And I think that was really useful. Anyway, that was a long, rambly answer for you.
But that's amazing. Okay, so, and kind of what element of the game took the most time then?
Hard to say which single element did, but I would say that the flavor of task that made Tunic take as long as it did was iteration on things. So just about every element of the game, whether it be an area or a mechanic, 3D model or a character or something, went through at least, one set or, 6 sets of revisions. And I think that's probably for the best. Like, I wouldn't go back and say, don't iterate past self, because I think that's what ended up making the game what it is, but it was very time consuming. So any given area in the game, like the beach area with the 4 pillars had so many different versions before that were at various stages of development, whether it be a sort of myopically built, like follow my nose sort of approach where I just built it as I liked, or a more meticulously thought out like graph paper version of it, or a gray box rough version of a new different design. And every time I learned a little bit more about what the design goals for that area were and what needed to happen there. And, I think that sort of iteration helped make it good in the ways that people appreciate it. I hope, at least. People often talk about the secrets and things, which strangely less time than a lot of level design, but I hope.
I mean, with the secrets also, suddenly, the path that is open, now you understand, the waterfall, if I go under the waterfall, I'm in that area, if I go there and then. I thought that was so smart in a way. I really didn't like them. But I was wondering, did you thought about all the areas separately, or was it really, I already know, okay, these areas will be there and it will be a whole, or was it separate maps?
They were developed separately, but I tried to have a pretty strong sense of spatial cohesion. So things, I ended up playing fast and loose with some stuff in the end because I realized it kind of doesn't matter, but things like entrances and exits lining up more or less accurately. So if you go into a spooky dark cave and take an elevator down and go along a passage and then go this way, you should be at approximately the same altitude if you had made the same moves outside, if that makes sense. So things like secret passages and connections and stuff end up making sense sort of spatially. Things like water tables are actually really sort of an annoyance, because you might think, you're in a forest and there's some water down at this level, but I also want there to be a water feature up at this level, but that means there needs to be a waterfall. And hey, if you go through this door, suddenly you're sort of 2 stories above where the water is there. So is there a waterfall that I can't see? And if I go to this other area, it keeps going down and down and down. Shouldn't it be flooded with water? Again, there are some places where I sort of play fast and loose, but generally speaking, there was a lot of fretting happening about that. No one will like my game because the sea level is inconsistent from scene to scene.
I think it is, but then you're some waterfalls I can walk in and others not. So, and especially in the dark levels, I feel it's very dark, so you're even more will there be some secret? Because I'm most likely missing it because it's so dark. So that was something that I noticed.
Yeah, those that dark area in particular was calibrated so that if you didn't have the item that you needed to navigate.
But I didn't mean the cave that you need to have the lantern. I meant in the cursed area, basically. That was very dark, or maybe that was my computer, but that was super dark.
Yeah.
And that also was interesting because suddenly your health is something to consider again. So that was an interesting mechanic, and that also made me thought that were you very inspired by the hero's journey while making the narrative for the whole game, or was it just by accident that I see it in it?
That's hard to say. I'm not like a writer by trade. I find writing stories sort of challenging, and so that was another thing that went through many iterations with Tunic, because the story is mostly told through play. The story sort of outline that I had was largely about reveals and gameplay beats and where you would go and stuff. And I think naturally falling out of that is this idea of, I'm not especially familiar with the hero's journey, but you are small and afraid, but you realize you have a task to do. And then there's a twist. The world is not what you thought it was. And then I don't know, reconciliation or something. I don't know how it works. So I think that those sort of beats can apply to a lot of different structures, and that's probably what you saw in there. But I think there's a certain appeal in parts of that where, in particular, discovering that there is more to the world than you thought there was, which I seem to recall being part of that trope, is something that's near and dear to my heart in video games. As I mentioned before, exploring a world and suddenly realizing, this isn't what I thought it was. There's layers here that were not apparent to me originally. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, and I also, of course, we need to talk about the language, and I also You seem to have your own sweater with the language on. So, how did you build up the language? Like, what was, or was it like, later on it came in, or was it immediately I wanted to have a strange language?
Yeah, it was pretty early on. Like, I think from the very beginning, there was going to be some sort of cryptic glyph language in the world. I think part of that comes from, I didn't realize it at the time, but stemmed from my love of reading instruction manuals when I didn't, know all the words. I'm just a little kid and I'm reading about, morph balls and warp zones in instruction manuals. I don't know what these words mean. But before development on the instruction manual started, development on the glyph language started, and it was mostly a textural thing, ideally. Like, it was meant to give texture to the world. You look at something and written words you don't understand are magical because you, A, know that they mean something, but B, don't know what it is, which are both appealing things. Not knowing something is very, like, that core thing that I was talking about, where you know that there's something going on, but you don't understand it, is sort of exemplified perfectly by strange glyph letters. It's clearly trying to communicate something, but you have no idea what it is. So that came very early. And then the development of it aesthetically went through, again, many iterations where it needed to be sort of geometric and angular, but sort of homogeneous enough that it could fade into the background and be textural without sort of demanding somebody go start doing frequency analysis. Yeah, I don't know how many beans you want to spill about the game, but
I want to spill all the beans.
You want to spill all the beans. Okay, so spoilers for how the language in Tunic works. It's a phonetic cipher to English, and the reason that it is that as opposed to a letter by letter like traditional cipher is that it had been done. We live in a post-Fez world, and Fez is near and dear to my heart, and the magic of discovering that these symbols in the world meant something was a very cool moment when playing Fez. But the moment you see strange glyphs in a world and you think, this probably means something, let me do some basic frequency analysis to figure out how it works, that would sort of ruin the magic, I think. The ideal version of it is someone who says, a secret language, let me see if I can figure it out. Oh, wait a second, this is more complicated than I thought it was. Let me just let it fade into the background and know that it's trying to communicate something, but I don't understand it, which is the intended result. Which didn't stop some people from doing analysis and figuring it out from the very start also.
Yeah, because so it is not based on the English system, but I guess more on like the Asian, the Chinese system, or words have meaning, or is it like I'm not sure about it.
It's a phonetic cipher in English, which means that it is basically written in English, but instead of using normal English spellings for words, it's broken down into phonemes that are then overlapping one another and rendered as glyph text. Not only is the glyph text hard to localize, sort of nearly impossible without sort of doing an entire new pass on it for each of the 30 languages that the game is in, but it also means that it's very particular to my accent, my Eastern Canadian
that's nice.
way of speaking, which mostly gets smoothed out because other people on the team are from, the American Midwest or from Vancouver in Canada. So a lot of those especially egregious pronunciation changes were smoothed out, except for one or two Easter eggs, which we left in for people to find.
Well, so did you say so for in other languages it changed also a bit, or no?
No, that was a thing early on. I realized if I am going to do this, it is going to be mostly an Easter egg for people to find. It's a nice bonus that this means anything at all, was sort of how I was looking at it. Of course, not realizing that people love decoding secret languages and lots of people are going to try to do it. But yeah, that was the game is designed carefully that almost nothing requires you understand the language. There's one or two super late game, incredibly optional puzzles that require you to know how it works, but everything else, it just sits in the background and lets you proceed as you like.
Yeah, it's like often I was like, I found out something. I was like, later I got a page and I was like, that's cool.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I was just keep on the pages and I was like, I have no clue, and then suddenly it snapped, right? But yeah. I get what you mean. It felt like when I was young, indeed, when my English was not that well, because English is not my native language. I also just looked at the pictures and see, what can I get out of it? A few words from part to part, and then I just basically kind of could guess what it all was. Wow, what it all meant. So I basically learned a lot of English from computer games, basically.
Yeah, I've heard that sentiment a lot, and sometimes people ask, "Oh, did you have Japanese import titles and this is meant to evoke that feeling?" And I didn't really. I had just normal everyday instruction manuals written in English, actually English and French, because I'm in Canada, and so a lot of the instruction manuals that we got had like 2 parts. But the experience of leafing through those and not fully understanding all of the words, even as a native English speaker, was the experience that I was going for. But yeah, I've heard that before from people who learned English reading, NES or computer game instruction manuals, that evoked those feelings as well.
So then it's what I'm feeling is like basically I'm the target audience, or is it kind of like a little bit like the people around my age? Is that a target audience, or is that just it came as an extra, or did you have a target audience in mind, or was it just?
Yeah, hard to say, because I wasn't making the game thinking, oh boy, this is a product that will target exactly this demographic or anything. It was just the sort of game that I really wanted to make. So I guess in that sense, it was targeting my exact demographic. But it turns out that has a fairly broad appeal, it seems, across like different language barriers, for instance, as well.
Yeah, because then I wanted to, of course, swap to the accessibility element of the game, because you can also, for people that don't like to die so much, you can also like set off the dying or the stamina. Was it like one of the last things that you added, or was it like, oh, I just want to add it anyhow, or was it because to make it a bigger target audience for your game? It came fairly late, although it was the sort of thing, I think only by coincidence did it come late. It was the sort of thing that I wanted to implement for a while, but it's an easy decision to make, to add that sort of feature to a game, I think. The argument against adding a mode where you just turn damage off is that there are some people out there that feels like that cheapens the experience for people who don't turn it on, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because if you are the sort of person that likes challenge, then you don't need to turn the option on. And if you don't like that sort of thing, then this gives you a release valve. You can go in there and turn it off for the whole game if you want, or for a particularly challenging encounter. It's fine, the game doesn't care. Excluding an option like that would only be catering to the subsection of people who want to play the game at full difficulty, and also resent that anyone would want to do anything else. And that sounds like a mean-spirited person to me, and I don't want to make a game particularly. So adding an accessibility option was kind of a no-brainer. We actually ended up added more later, I think in patches after launch, where it started with just you don't take any damage. It's an accessibility mode, and then we added another sort of more options section that just sort of reduces the combat difficulty a fair bit. So you still need to do the thing a little bit if you want to, but sort of just a middle ground. Okay, so even when you have that accessibility, how do you keep it still challenging for those people? Have you thought about that? Okay, wait, is it still yeah, I mean, I've never thought about just having the God mode on. Have you thought about how do you keep it interesting, or is it just a strange thought?
Yeah, the game is designed to be challenging combat-wise, because one of the things that I really cherish in games is I think it's being invited to fail, if that makes sense. If you are playing a game and it's not presenting much of a challenge, then I prefer attempting something and failing miserably, and then needing to realize if I succeed in this, it's because I'm good at it, not I'm just being ushered through the rest of the game, which is a fine and totally good experience in a lot of cases. But if I want to feel like I'm a small little creature in a vast and perilous world, I want to feel like there are things that rebuke me. I want to wander into a dark cave and get absolutely pulverized, because that means that now I have in the back of my mind, as I explore other parts of the world, there's that really scary cave. I wonder what's in there. How exciting is that? And so I like having multiple options, some of which are way above my pay grade and really challenging. However, some people don't like that. And I understand that. And I would rather those people be able to do the part of the game that they like, which is exploring and solving puzzles and stuff, especially because in Tunic, a lot of the puzzle solving stuff happens a fair bit later. So it's left up to the player to decide whether or not they want to do that. And as far as still making the game challenging or like capturing that same feeling, that feeling is, wow, I'm small and I'm being pulverized. You can still be small and be pulverized when you have God mode on, because you still like flinch and fall over. It's just your HP bar doesn't go down. So it can still feel sort of harrowing to smash your way through a bunch of enemies and keep getting knocked down by them without sort of, I don't know, violating this tenet that you're just a little fragile creature.
Well, you're small, basically. That's the thing that you wanted to have the player feel, right? That you're a small little fox. Why a fox?
Good question. So early on, like I've sort of alluded to this a little bit, but one of the goals early on was to have the distance between the player and the player character be as small as possible. I wanted the player to feel like this is me exploring this world. It's not the story of this other character and I happen to be driving them. It's I am going on an adventure, and I'm doing so with this sort of like very ambiguous cipher. The cipher being ambiguous meant that, like, cipher in the sense of like Avatar, this representation of me needed to be generic enough that most people could map themselves onto it, right? Because if it's a person of some kind, then there's all kinds of questions about like, what does this person look like, right? How are they dressed? And I wasn't able to this was a small indie game, and still is. So making like a full-fledged character creator was another question. So having some sort of, anthropomorphic character to be sort of a blank slate for the player to project themselves onto made a lot of sense. And I don't think I put a lot of thought into exactly what it would be. It was just the first sketch was, you're a little fox. And it went from there. And in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense. Foxes are sort of like somewhat mischievous and very popular, it turns out. And there's good contrast, orange against green makes the fox very visible. Yeah, and they get up to trouble.
Okay, yeah. And then, of course, the other question, like, why is it called Tunic?
So originally, the game was called Secret Legend for years, and that was just the name of the project directory. I liked that name a lot, but it has some pretty obvious problems, which is no one remembered what the game was. It's very...
It sounds like that RPG that we already have like built in.
Yeah, exactly. And that was sort of by design. It wanted to sound like, isn't that like some weird old game on the Super Nintendo? Like, don't we have one that's like that? Something sort of generic sounding, but evocative. But people just didn't remember what it was. So we knew that we needed to change the name, and we just had an enormous like multi-page document with a bunch of ideas, all of which were pretty terrible. And I think at some point I was on a roll with like X and Y games or names, Sword and Shield and that sort of thing. And one of them was a Tunic and Tuft, for like the tuft of hair. And at a certain point, that got broken into, two separate things. And I think Adam Saltzman from Finji, or maybe Felix Kramer, sort of highlighted that in the document and was like, maybe not so bad. In the end, I think, so naming things is super hard. The advice that I got about naming things, which I can attest to being pretty reasonable, is you need to find a name that nobody on the team really hates, and you can get...
Nice.
Yeah. So that's the first requirement. No one really hates it. And the second thing is you can get the like domain name for it, because it'd be really frustrating if you had a name that you really loved but couldn't get the domain name for it. So those are the requirements.
Awesome. That's a very simple explanation of getting the right name. Okay, so I already hear that at that moment you already found your publisher. So quite early in the whole process, you had a publisher. How was your connecting with Vinci?
It was good. I think the rename happened in 2017, maybe. Yeah, because I think 2018 was the
Yeah,
Xbox.
then it's called already too.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if we were 100% signed with Vinci at the point, because the relationship there with the publisher was very organic, and it was that I had approached Adam and Becca about getting advice, like, hey, I'm looking for funding on this project. What do you think? Do you have any wisdom on how to do this? What do you think of the design? And they were very forthcoming with advice and insights and stuff like that. So at a certain point, it became clear that Tunic needed a proper publisher. Just like support on that end was something that I couldn't really do. I considered should I self-fund this and actually self-publish it? Like, as nice as that is to have full control over everything, I'm not the sort of person that wants to run a publisher to self-publish my own game, because it's a huge amount of work, and I just didn't know how to do it. So it was clear that I needed a publisher, and we did due diligence and checked with lots of folks. But in the end, it was like the folks that have already been helping out on this project and know it very well and already want to publish the game. Like, this is a perfect fit.
Yeah, how did you find each other? Or was it just your roommate? I don't know, or like
it was, if I trace it back, it comes from being able to travel, which is a privilege I acknowledge, but being able to go to the GDC and Fantastic Arcade in Austin and stuff like that. And that's, I think, probably I met Adam and Becca either in Austin or at GDC, probably at GDC first in San Francisco. And it was probably through Felix Kramer, who did a lot of sort of production and biz dev help on the game, especially early on. So yeah, it was just sort of talking to the right folks and just establishing. It's weirdly wholesome. It's hard to offer advice for people to be like, here's how you get your game published, because in our case it was become really good friends with some nice people, which
yes.
a challenging thing to do.
Yeah,
sure.
But what a lot of developers say, and what I also agree on, is like going to these events, because most of the people will be there and with the same interests, so it is so much easier to find the people that are interested in your game. But of course, traveling is something that is important.
It's hard. And it's hard. I'm on the east coast of Canada, so it's a long flight for me to go to somewhere like San Francisco. But I would be someone in Europe, for instance, even more challenging. I guess Gamescom is pretty centrally located.
Yeah, Gamescom and DevCon is very close by. I had like a special a question from one of my line of, and I think maybe it's a bit of a weird one, but he just wondered, like, when will paper game guides make a proper return?
Paper game guides?
Yes. I
have no idea. I don't know if I'm the person to ask for that. I had to make my own. I don't know. I think it's they right now are like fun add-ons, like sometimes you'll get a physical release of something that comes with a manual that someone has made for the physical release. Tunic, it sort of cheats by saying, hey, you probably downloaded this from a storefront like Steam or the Nintendo shop. So there's no way that you can have a physical manual. And if we included one as a PDF, you probably wouldn't read it. So we're going to make you read it by having it be a core part of the game, where we give you it page by page.
That's the reason.
Yeah. So I think that's probably why people ended up looking at the manual for it. So I don't know if manuals existed, I think, because in order to add value to a game, your NES game, your Atari 2600 game, in order to sometimes make it usable, you needed to include this auxiliary piece of media. We think of text as very cheap now, but that's a byte per character, right? You want to have a paragraph of text. That's a lot of sprites that you're giving up. That's a lot of music that you're not playing by having text on your ROM. You could pack a lot of text on a page of a manual. So if you've got a story and you want to communicate it, don't spring for the extra chips in your NES cart because those are expensive. Just throw it in the manual. And that's just not a concern anymore. And also explaining how your game works, like on a VCS game, 2600 game, or an Intellivision game or something, you needed to read that manual because you didn't know what the heck these different game modes were. I need to turn the physical switches on the machine into the right position to play a 2-player game. Like, there's no room for explanation of that. There's no tutorial space for these games, so you needed a manual to teach you how to do it. In some ways, they're not really necessary at all. They're just like an aesthetic, nice to have. But yeah, I also long for those.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what Tunic really makes remarkable and rememberable. I think that around the world, you just kind of find that manual and then you're like, I discovered something. So I think that's most likely why he was really wondering about that question. And I was wondering because, well, you started with making a game, but like, have you been like a game developer before, or was it like out of the box? What was your history?
I have been making terrible games for a long time. I think I got books from the library, my local library, which were horribly outdated, that were talking about programming in BASIC. And I eventually found out, hey, my home 386, my family computer, had QBasic on it, and I could use that to write BASIC programs. And of course, I wrote it in old-fashioned BASIC, like these books were telling me to, with like line numbers and stuff like that, before realizing that in QBasic, you don't even need those. Anyway, so I started making computer games then. Even before that, I had made terrible board games and choose your own adventure stories and stuff like that. I sort of fell off of making games for a while because I didn't have the right tools, and then started using Flash and later Unity, OpenGL and Glut and stuff in university, and got a job at a casual game studio working on hidden object games. And I worked there for many years. And we didn't just make hidden object games there. We made other things as well. But like I mentioned earlier, none of those were the sort of thing that lit a fire in my soul the way that games about like exploration and discovery work. Those games are very much about being predictable in particular ways and not being too terribly surprising or breaking the mold. And yeah, so that was the point where I said, you know what, I'm gonna go out on my own and try to make this thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna quit and just go for it. And then you just took the leap. That's very impressive. So what was your biggest challenge if you overview it?
Well, the thing that made it take the most time was the iteration, but the biggest challenges were probably the business side of things. Anytime a decision had to be made that involved the logistics of human beings or money or contract, I had to muddle through it, and it was just like a slog. The hard email you hate writing, the one that's been sitting in your inbox for a long time that you think like, it physically pains me to try and puzzle through how to do that. Like that's most of the business side of things for me. And so I find it just like very stressful and fret inducing, which is one of the reasons why getting business help ended up being so useful. I think the biggest challenge category would have been like dealing with myself, if that makes sense. So my own self-doubt from day to day and second guessing myself and redoing stuff. So that iteration comes often from second guessing my own decisions and feeling like it's going to be a real catastrophe. Like just dealing with those emotions over the course of 7 years was the least fun part, I guess.
And how do you feel that you overcome those feelings? Or was it just only after the launch that you're like, oh, phew, people like my game?
There was a very specific moment, which was learning that people liked the game. That was the big relief. Because I was convinced basically all the way up until launch that I had made a terrible mistake. At worst, I had made a terrible mistake. At best, hey, this thing's pretty okay in some spots. And so it was a staggering surprise to find out that people ended up liking it as much as they did. But yeah, there were a lot of sleepless nights staring at the ceiling thinking, I've made a terrible mistake, haven't I?
Okay. Okay, and how did you still kept the motivation? Because most people, if they keep staring at the wall, they don't stop staring at the wall. Like, what was your tactics?
Twofold, I think, and they're both actually the same solution. So one solution was having other people invested in it, like not just monetarily, but other people invested in the success of this thing, other collaborators, the publisher, yes, some people who invested money in it. And the second thing was having other people that I could talk to. So I guess what I'm saying is that working with others helped from two directions. One is, well, I can't fail them because it's important not just to me that this come out, but to these other people as well. But from the other side, being able to have other people on the team that you can talk with and commiserate with, and most importantly, share ideas with and have them say, yes, that's a good idea, or no, that's a bad idea, was really helpful. So just being able to talk to folks and being able to say, hey, everyone, I feel really bad about feature X and I want to totally rework it, and have them say, feature X is fine. Move on. You don't need to redo it for a sixth time. So that was definitely helpful.
Do I hear a little bit that one of your characteristics is that you're like a people pleaser, or is that just?
Yeah, I guess a little bit. Like, I want to make sure that people who have skin in the game emotionally are going to be taken care of. It's starting to get heavy here, but I wonder how that figures into game development or any sort of long-term project is. How you interact with people.
I think it is the thing, right? I also interviewed like I have interviewed already 29 indie developers. Like 4 people have experienced a burnout, so it is very common, and it is very hard to be in your own room and like make something, having not immediately the feedback of the project, because like you often get the feedback there is an error, so that's what you always see in the input loader. So
yeah,
I guess that is a challenging thing. So
absolutely.
But you're overcoming it, and I mean, with this moment, it really became a success, and that's really cool to hear and to see. What is the future? What are you going to do with all of this?
That's a good question. The game has been out for like a year and a half now, which is sort of a long time. Some of that time was spent, doing patches and working on it and stuff, but day to day now, I don't need to do much Tunic work, which has left me in a weird space because I love making things, but I don't have it in me to produce another big project about something that I love, because I already made a big project about one thing that I love, which is, a feeling of wonder and excitement. And it took a long time because there's a lot of content there. I'm pushing myself in the direction to make something small, but something that still feels worth making and it evokes those same feelings in me, which is a challenge. So I've been working on some small projects, mostly for fun, to get myself back into it. Like I enjoy programming a lot. Like it is just watching things, feeling things click together, and organizing systems and having them work the way you want them to is very gratifying to me. I've been doing a little bit of that. It's hard to say that's going to turn into a large project. I think I would like to make something with characters and writing in it, because that was something that I wasn't really able to do in Tunic. But it has been hard to commit to something. And I think that maybe is not burnout, but a sort of fear about leaping into something big again that will take over my life. But yeah, for the time being, taking a little bit of a break, but looking forward to whatever's next.
But is it that you, because you already have such a success with Tunic, that the next project, the barrier is already set, like, you need to kind of want that also to become a great success? Or is that not one of the reasons?
Maybe a little bit. I think that if I set my sights on making something better than this 7-year project that I polished along with the rest of the team, then I will either be terribly disappointed or spend more than 7 years making it.
Oof. Yes.
Which I don't want to do. So yeah, it's hard to say. I think I have accepted the fact that whatever I make next will probably be very different and smaller in scope. I've adopted that for probably the reasons that you mentioned, which is I don't want to do something that is even bigger than this, because what would that be? I don't know. I sort of emptied my brain into Tunic, bled myself dry in some ways to make that. So what would be more? I don't know. I don't know if I have another one of those in me.
I mean, Tunic is. I mean, I really thought it was really remarkable. I mean, when I was playing it, and then even that I need to new game. Normally, I'm super annoyed, but it was like, oh, now I suddenly can do so much more. So I really felt that. Although I think new game, maybe it could have a fail pass to us. We really want to have a new game, but that's.
Well, yeah, I think you probably still have your old save file there. If you hit new game, it just creates a new save file, so you might be able to go into load game and get your old.
Immediately turned out, and then it was like to the continue, and then it already happened. So
alas.
that was. But I learned that I became better in the game, so that was pretty cool. That's really remarkable, because I don't have it with a lot of games, because when I need to redo stuff, I know I am bored very fast, so that's not my thing. Okay.
I have the opposite problem, where often I want to start over because I feel like, I can do so much better this time, which means that games take 7 years to make.
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, it's you can really see that you took so much time in it. I mean, every notch and corner has like a special thing. It's really good.
I'm glad you liked it.
Because you're now making some smaller projects, but is it like that you're still connected with Vinci, and that they are your kind of your business partner in this, or like how do we see?
I'm not doing anything especially serious at the moment. It's mostly just noodling around and trying to learn some new technology. So I don't have any plans for commercial release of anything. But the recent sort of mix-up and tumult over at Unity has meant that questions about which technology to use are sort of up in the air. Yeah. I have been having a lot of fun programming in.
You're not using Unity, but which software or which engine?
I'm using a framework called Monogame, which has sort of a convoluted history. It's a port of an old XNA thing, I think. I don't know the exact lineage there. It is very constrained in scope as to what it does, which is very freeing, because that I get to implement all of those things from scratch, and I get the same excitement that I had making the very beginning of Tunic all those years ago, where it's like, I get to do all these things, I get to write all this code, but it's very slow going, and I don't know if it's practical continuing with, but it's very neat. And also Godot is a very cool project that has a lot of potential, I think. Yeah, I'll be curious to see where I end up.
Okay, so you're doing like a program like C and A, and then like Godot, both kind of seeing what you're going to use, because you are kind of too fed up of Unity, if I hear this correctly.
I think the recent news around that meant that it was a bit of a wake-up call to say, like, you know what, maybe it's time to start looking at some other things. And also, I just really enjoy programming, and as much as Unity does for you, and as much freedom as you have with scripting, you do a lot more programming when you work in something that isn't an engine, but is just a framework where you are, writing lines of code to talk to the systems that are provided to you, as opposed to, constructing things in an editor or whatever.
Okay, I almost hear that we are going to see Andrew Engine. That's what I hear.
No, anything that I make will pale in comparison to existing frameworks that are already out there. So I'm mostly doing it as a learning exercise.
So in the whole project, like, what are you the most proud of?
Ooh, wow. I'm proud of myself for having done it. The thing that I'm most proud of that is an individual thing, I think, is probably the golden path. It represents a lot of the things that I hold most dear when it comes to discovery and hidden secrets and stuff like that. And I thought it was pretty neat when I was working on it, but seeing people solve it and the feelings that they get and how they express themselves when they do solve it is just, it warms my heart in ways that I did not expect.
Okay. I still, I guess, need to discover the golden path because I don't
Ooh,
think I
okay,
discovered
exciting.
that one. How many hours do you think is the average play of your game to unlock all those stuff?
I checked the other day on how long to beat, because a question comes up a lot as we were developing the game, like, oh, how long does it take to how much content is going to be in this game? And we thought, it's, 6 to 8 probably. It's not going to be a 2-hour experience, but it's not going to be, this sprawling 40-hour incredible RPG project or something. But in the end, How to Beat says that its main story 12 hours, but if you want to do everything, absolutely everything, is going to take you over 20. So I think we did pretty well.
Yeah, that's very good for a game. And because you unlock so many new paths and stuff, so sometimes it's just easier to those enemies, I'm not going to defeat them, I'm just going to rush to the corner and then just, at a certain moment, because you already defeated them before, and you're like, not again. That's my motivation sometimes, not again. So I'm trying to find a way how to, don't fight them and get faster. So I guess that's the 20-hour when you are really fast rushing to everything, I guess.
Could be, yeah.
I mean, just the idea. I don't know. I will find out. I already have too many hours because I need to restart. But it's a good experience. Yes. I always ask, because this channel is for people that are also interested to start an indie journey or whatsoever. And what would be your advice for starters to start with indie dev?
The most powerful tool at your disposal for getting into making games is getting over your fear that you will be bad at it. Accept that you will be bad at it and jump right in. Everybody has like 100 bad games inside of them. And the sooner you get started making those bad games, the sooner you can start making good games. I think a lot of people get worked up about what tool am I going to learn? What technology am I going to, put all my eggs in? And those are important decisions. They are important decisions, but they are a trap, because the more time you spend thinking about them, the less time you're actually making things. So it is far more valuable to make the wrong decision, but learn a bunch of stuff along the way, than it is to come up with the perfect plan. You learn by failing. And so fail as much as possible and try to grow each time you make something new. Also, finish your projects is a big one that I have trouble with, but is the people who are, in my experience, the people who I admire the most when it comes to producing work finish what they make. And that is just a very valuable skill to have, because the urge to start over or to abandon will be so strong. But power through, finish it, have some sort of completed project. It will definitely benefit you, even if the end product is trash.
Yeah, I think those are very good advices, because basically you're saying that perfectionism is a trap. I just want to put in the anecdotes that Edison, his the lamp was his 1001 experiment, and the others we don't really know. So it's like keep on making all those failed projects, so then there will be indeed that amazing one that comes out of it. So I really like that. Okay, any last words before we're closing up?
No, I think that's everything. I like your red pandas back there. I assume that's what those are.
Yes, yes. I don't have foxes, but I have red pandas, and
yeah, close enough. They're friends.
They're friends, exactly. Okay.
I think that's everything.
Yeah, thank you very much for this interview. I think we covered a lot, and it was a very interesting journey, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And,
I did very much. Thank you so much.
Yes, and everyone, thanks for watching.
Wow, I really enjoyed this interview. It was so honest, and I'm so glad that we just really get to know Andrew a lot better. I thought it was a very in-depth interview, and I hope you liked it as well. If you liked it, please, as always, like and subscribe, because YouTube doesn't like long in-depth interviews. But of course we're going to continue, because next time I'm going to interview a game that even just went wild with the launch because they shadow dropped it during Nintendo. So that is also going to be a very interesting interview where I'm very excited for. So see you in the next one. Enjoy more, create more. This was Acreates. Bye bye.